The forecast said 15 inches. Marcus heard it on the radio while loading his truck at the ranger station, back when the sky was still grey instead of white. 15 inches by evening, they said. He'd worked in the Colorado Rockies for 3 seasons. 15 inches was nothing. He'd driven worse roads hungover, but forecasts lie and mountains don't care about predictions. By the time Marcus realized the storm wasn't slowing down, he was already 40 minutes from town on a mountain road that had become invisible. The windshield wipers couldn't keep up. The snow fell sideways, thick and relentless, turning the world into static. His hands gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white. If you're watching this right now, before we get started, if you're already digging this kind of content, leave a like. Seriously, it helps the channel so much, and I really appreciate it. Now, let's get into Marcus's story. Marcus was 23 years old, lean and weathered for his age, with the kind of face that looked older when he was tired. He'd grown up in these mountains. His grandfather had a cabin about 15 miles north, deeper into the range. Marcus had spent half his childhood there, learning to read weather in the way clouds moved, understanding how to respect the land without fearing it. But respect and fear were becoming the same thing as the visibility dropped below 50 feet. He downshifted, feeling the truck's tires lose grip on the road beneath the snow. The headlights created a tunnel of white. Nothing beyond it existed. His phone had no signal. Of course it didn't. The smart thing would have been to pull over, wait it out in the cab with the heat running. Marcus knew this. He'd been trained for this. But the cabin was closer than town, maybe 8 miles if he could find the turnoff. 8 miles versus 40. His tank was 3/4 full. He could make it. The road curved, and Marcus almost missed the turnoff. The wooden sign that usually marked the Forest Service road was buried under a foot of fresh powder. He only recognized the tree, an old spruce shaped like a question mark, because he'd counted on that tree 100 times before. The truck lurched onto the narrower road, and immediately he knew it was wrong. The snow was deeper here, untouched by other vehicles. The trees pressed in from both sides, their branches sagging under the weight of ice and snow. The wind funneled between them like it had somewhere to be, and it screamed across the windshield with a sound that made Marcus's chest tight. He'd been driving for 5 minutes when the truck died. Not a stall, a complete, sudden, mechanical surrender. The engine coughed once and went silent. Marcus turned the key. The starter motor groaned, but nothing caught. Again. The battery was dying with each attempt. He could hear it in the weakening sound. He stopped trying. Outside, the world was white and getting whiter. The wind rocked the cab. Marcus checked his phone again. No signal, but the battery showed 40%. The truck's internal clock read 4:47 p.m. In the mountains in December, darkness came fast. It was probably coming now. He sat in the silence thinking. The cabin was maybe 3-4 miles from here. He couldn't be sure exactly. The road was buried, but it was still a road. It went straight up the mountain to the cabin, and the cabin had a generator, supplies, a fireplace. His grandfather had stocked it last summer before he moved to Arizona. Staying in the truck meant freezing slowly in the dark. The cab would hold heat for a while, maybe a few hours, but not all night. Not in this cold. Marcus grabbed his jacket from behind the seat. A good one, insulated, meant for this work. He pulled on the knit hat from the glove compartment. He had a flashlight in the truck bed, along with some emergency supplies, a blanket, a first aid kit, flares. He wrapped the blanket around his shoulders like a cape and tied it at the chest with the nylon cord from the emergency kit. Not ideal, but it would keep some heat in. The cold hit him like a physical blow the moment he opened the door. His lungs seized. The wind cut through his clothes as if they were paper. Snow filled the truck cab immediately, swirling up under the dashboard. Marcus closed the door and started walking. The flashlight beam looked small and fragile against the enormous whiteness. The road beneath his feet was invisible. He walked in what he hoped was a straight line, counting his steps, trying to establish a rhythm. 100 steps, and he'd reassess. 200, and he'd check the time. By 150 steps, his face was numb. His fingers were already starting to hurt. The kind of pain that meant frostbite was thinking about it, sizing him up, deciding whether to take him seriously. He shoved his hands deep in his pockets and kept walking. The forest closed in around him. Trees emerged from the white like they were watching. The wind sounded different here, more personal, like it knew his name. Snow was collecting on his face, freezing instantly in his eyelashes and beard. Every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. Marcus had read about people dying in blizzards 50 yards from shelter, people who gave up, people who got confused and walked in circles. He focused on the road, or where he thought the road was. He focused on his breathing. He focused on the cabin, the generator, the fireplace, the coffee his grandfather kept in the pantry. 200 steps. His legs were already tired. The snow was thigh-deep in some places, and the walking was like moving through concrete. He was sweating under the layers despite the cold. The exertion was pushing heat through his body, and the sweat would become a problem soon. Cold plus wet equals death in the mountains. But stopping was worse than dying. Stopping meant giving up, and Marcus hadn't learned how to do that yet. He walked into the darkness with his small flashlight, counting steps, measuring his survival in forward motion, not yet understanding that the cabin was closer than he thought, or that what he would find there would matter more than any of this struggling. The wind pushed him deeper into the white. The mountains held him like they held everything, indifferent and patient and completely unforgiving. The cabin appeared like a ghost materializing from fog, except it was more solid than that. One moment Marcus saw nothing but white. The next moment, a dark shape resolved itself from the blur, and his brain almost didn't process it as real. He'd walked for what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes. His legs had stopped working properly about 15 minutes ago. They were just pistons now, mechanical, divorced from his conscious control. He fell against the cabin door and found it locked. Of course it was locked. His grandfather was careful about things like that. Marcus's fingers were beyond clumsy. They were tools that no longer responded to his commands. He couldn't hold the flashlight steady. He couldn't work the combination lock on the storage shed where his grandfather kept supplies. But the window on the north side, the one that had never locked properly, was still where Marcus remembered it. He used a piece of deadfall to break it, barely feeling the impact. The glass came away jagged and threatening, but he was too cold to care about bleeding. He climbed through, bringing half the outside snow with him, and collapsed on the cabin floor in a heap of soaked clothing and desperate exhaustion. The interior was dark and cold and smelled like pine and old coffee. Marcus lay there for minutes that felt like hours, just breathing, just existing in a space where the wind couldn't find him. Eventually, his shaking hands managed to find the oil lantern on the wall shelf. The matches were in their tin beside it. They always were. The lantern caught, and light filled the cabin like water filling a container. If you're enjoying this story so far, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps support what we're doing here. Let me know in the comments what you think is about to happen. The cabin was small. One main room with a kitchen corner, a wood stove, a bed, a table, a few shelves. The generator was in the shed out back, but Marcus couldn't face going back outside. Instead, he fed wood to the stove until it roared to life, heat pouring out, and then he stripped off his wet clothes and wrapped himself in his grandfather's blankets from the bed. It took an hour for Marcus to stop shaking. It took another hour for his fingers and toes to stop screaming as the feeling came back into them. By then, full night had arrived outside, and the wind was still hammering the small structure like it had a personal vendetta. When he could move again, Marcus made coffee on the camp stove and found soup in the pantry, canned minestrone, not fancy, but solid. The heat and food brought him back to something resembling human. He was lucky. He knew he was lucky. 20 minutes longer, and hypothermia would have finished the job the cold had started. Marcus was sitting at the small table, warming his hands on the coffee cup, when he noticed the photograph. It was on the highest shelf, partially hidden behind a row of paperback books. He wouldn't have seen it if he hadn't stood up to look for more coffee. Wouldn't have reached up just to explore, just out of idle curiosity born from shock and relief. But he did, and his fingers caught the edge of the frame. The photograph was old, maybe 30 years old, based on the color quality and the style of clothing. It showed two people standing in front of this cabin, his grandfather definitely much younger, maybe 35, and a woman Marcus had never seen before. They were standing close, his grandfather's arm around her waist, and they were both smiling in a way that suggested genuine happiness, not the posed smile of a photograph. Behind them, the cabin looked newer, and the forest behind it was summer green. Marcus stared at the photograph for a long time. His grandfather had been married once to Marcus's grandmother, who died when Marcus was 5. After that, he'd been alone for decades, or at least that's what Marcus had always assumed. They didn't talk much about personal things. That wasn't how men in this family operated. But this photograph suggested something else, a relationship that happened outside Marcus's knowledge, outside the frame of his understanding of his grandfather's life. He turned the frame over. The back was sealed with tape, old and yellowed. Marcus carefully peeled it back, and a letter fell out, folded carefully and addressed in handwriting he didn't recognize. To whoever finds this. Marcus sat back down. His coffee was cooling, forgotten. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the cabin. But inside, in the lamplight, Marcus began to read about his grandfather's life, about a woman named Eleanor, about a choice that had been made 60 years ago in these mountains, about a story that had been kept carefully hidden. The letter was long. It was written in Spanish. Marcus spoke Spanish poorly, but well enough to understand the important parts. It was addressed to family, to whoever might come looking. It explained how Elena had come to work at the ranch where Marcus's grandfather was employed, how they had fallen in love despite the complications, how there had been a choice to make between duty and love. The letter was not from his grandfather. The handwriting was different. It was dated 1985, which was before Marcus was born, which was after his grandmother died. And then Marcus found the second photograph, this one newer, still hidden behind the books. It showed his grandfather with the same woman maybe 10 years later. They looked older, weathered by time, but they were still smiling. Marcus read the letter 3 times before he fully understood what it meant. His grandfather had loved someone else. His grandfather had had a life that existed outside of what his family knew. And he had kept it secret, kept these photographs, kept this letter, probably meaning to tell someone, probably never finding the right moment or the right words. The storm outside seemed smaller now, less important. Marcus sat in the lamplight with a photograph in one hand and a letter in the other, and he realized that his grandfather had never really told him anything about himself, about who he actually was, about the parts of his life that mattered most. He folded the letter carefully and put both photographs in his jacket pocket. Whatever had happened between his grandfather and Elena, whatever choice had been made, it was a part of the old man's story that Marcus hadn't known existed. And now that he did, everything felt different. Morning came grey and reluctant, the storm still hammering but with less fury, like it was tired after its all-night assault. Marcus woke on the cabin bed, confused for a moment about where he was. Then the memories came back. The truck, the walk, the cabin, the photographs. He checked his phone, still no signal, but the battery was at 12%. He plugged it into the portable charger his grandfather kept for emergencies, one of the few modern conveniences the old man had adopted. While it charged, Marcus made more coffee and tried to figure out what came next. The storm wasn't clearing fast enough to leave safely, and besides, his truck was still stuck on the mountain road. He could stay here, wait for the weather to clear, maybe walk out tomorrow if conditions improved. or he could try to contact someone with the satellite communicator his grandfather kept in the shed, though that was meant for true emergencies, and Marcus wasn't sure this qualified. He was standing at the window, looking out at the white landscape, when he remembered the letter in his pocket. The photograph showed his grandfather young and happy, with a woman he'd never met. The letter explained a relationship that had lasted decades hidden from the family, but it didn't explain everything. It didn't explain why his grandfather had kept these things secret. It didn't explain what had happened with Elena, whether they were still in contact, whether she was still alive. Marcus made a decision. He found his grandfather's address book, an actual, physical book kept in a drawer beside the bed. The handwriting inside was familiar, his grandfather's careful, deliberate script. He flipped through the pages until he found Elena with a phone number and an address in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Santa Fe, not far, geographically. A few hours from where Marcus's grandfather lived now, in Arizona. But it might as well have been a different world, a different life entirely. Marcus looked at the phone number for a long time. His grandfather was alive. Marcus had talked to him just 2 weeks ago, a brief, awkward conversation about nothing much, the way they always talked. But here was evidence of a whole part of his life that Marcus had never known about, a person he'd clearly cared about enough to keep photographs and letters for decades. The ethical question was simple and complicated at the same time. Did Marcus have a right to open this door? Did he have an obligation to? He decided to start smaller. He turned the address book to the front page, where his grandfather's name was written in fading ink, Santiago Morales. Below it, the address and phone number in Arizona. Marcus had his number memorized. They called every month or so, perfunctory check-ins that never lasted more than 5 minutes. He tried the SAT communicator. It took him 15 minutes to figure out how to use it, and then another 10 to establish a connection. But eventually, he heard his grandfather's voice answering with cautious confusion. "Abuelo, it's Marcus. I'm okay. My truck broke down on the mountain road last night, and I made it to your cabin. I'm fine. I just wanted you to know." There was a pause. "You walked in that storm?" "I had to. The cabin was closer than town. I'm warm. I have food. I'm waiting for the weather to clear." Another pause. In the background, Marcus could hear television voices, the sound of his grandfather's normal life continuing in Arizona. "You're lucky," his grandfather said finally. "The mountains don't forgive mistakes." "I know. Did you get inside okay?" "The north window. I broke it. I'm sorry. I'll fix it." "Don't worry about the window." His grandfather's voice was different now, something in it Marcus couldn't quite identify. Emotion? Concern? "Just wait it out. You call me when you can leave." Marcus wanted to ask about Elena. The question was right there, forming itself in his throat. But something stopped him. Not fear exactly, but a sense that this conversation, this connection with his grandfather, was fragile and temporary, and asking questions would break something. "I found some things," Marcus said carefully. "In the cabin. Some old photographs." The pause was longer this time. "Ah, I wondered if you might." "Abuelo, not now, mijo. Not over this machine. When I see you again, we can talk. But for now, stay warm and stay safe. That's what matters." The line went quiet except for static. "Okay," Marcus said. "I will." After he signed off, Marcus sat in silence, holding the photographs in his hands. His grandfather had known they were there. He had left them there deliberately, or at least hadn't hidden them so well that they couldn't be found by someone who looked. It felt almost like his grandfather had been waiting for this moment, for Marcus to stumble into the cabin, for the storm to clear enough that he could think, for the right conversation to happen. Over the next few hours, Marcus explored the cabin more carefully. He found a journal in the same drawer with the address book, his grandfather's journal, decades of entries written in the same careful hand. He didn't read all of them, that felt like too much of a violation, but he found entries from 1985, when the letter had been written, when Eleanor had apparently come to visit the cabin. His grandfather had written, Eleanor came today. We sat in the rain and talked for 4 hours. She asked me if I regretted the choice I made all those years ago. I told her I regretted the pain, but not the choice. Some things aren't about happy endings. They're about being honest with yourself about what you wanted, and then living with the consequences. Marcus closed the journal carefully and put it back where he found it. Some stories he was beginning to understand weren't meant to be fully known, not by outsiders anyway, but they were meant to be discovered eventually. They were meant to change something in the people who found them. By the second day, the storm had weakened to intermittent snow and wind gusts that no longer sounded like they wanted to murder everything. Marcus spent the morning outside, clearing snow from the cabin's access road, making it passable. His body was sore from the previous day's ordeal, and his fingers still tingled with the after effects of frostbite. The pain was actually a good sign, the nerve endings waking back up. But he moved steadily, methodically, using the physical work to think. The photographs were still in his jacket pocket. He'd taken them out several times, studying the images like they were encrypted messages he needed to decode. In the newer photograph, his grandfather and Elena looked genuinely content together, the way people look when they're comfortable in their own skin and comfortable with each other. There was no guilt in that picture, no sense of secretiveness or shame. There was just two people who clearly cared about each other. By afternoon, Marcus had dug out enough of the road that he felt confident he could walk back to his truck. He'd decided not to try driving. The truck was old and temperamental, and he wasn't sure what had caused it to die in the first place. A walk in daylight in relatively clear weather was manageable. A walk was better than another night, wondering about his grandfather's hidden life. But before he left, Marcus did something that surprised himself. He sat down at the cabin's small table and wrote a letter. "Abuelo," he began, his handwriting rough and unpracticed compared to his grandfather's precise script. "I found the photographs. I found the journal, though I didn't read much of it. I want you to know that I'm not angry or confused or any of the things I think you might worry about. I'm mostly just aware. I'm aware that you're a person with your own life, your own history, your own choices. I've spent my whole life thinking of you as my grandfather, which you are, but I never really thought about you as a person with a story that extends beyond being my grandfather. That seems unfair to you, now that I think about it. I'm sorry for that. When I get home, maybe we can talk about it, or maybe we don't have to. Either way, I want you to know I understand a little better now." He signed it with his name and left the letter on the table, weighted down by the coffee pot. The walk back to his truck took 90 minutes. The road was still difficult, the snow still deep, but the daylight made it feel manageable. Marcus's truck was exactly where he'd left it, buried and patient, waiting like a sleeping animal. He tried the engine. It turned over immediately, catching and rumbling to life, as if the previous night had never happened. Sometimes machines just needed a rest. He drove slowly down the mountain, in and out of snow showers, his mind circling around the revelation of his grandfather's hidden relationship. It wasn't shocking exactly. People had entire lives that were invisible to their families. That was normal. But it had humanized his grandfather in a way that nothing else had. He wasn't just the old man who called every month and said, "Stay safe," with the particular intensity of someone who'd seen mountains take people. He was someone who'd loved someone, who'd made choices and lived with the consequences, who'd kept photographs and letters and memories. By the time Marcus reached town, the sun was beginning to set. He stopped at a diner, ordered a burger and coffee, and let the warmth and normalcy of the place ground him back in reality. His phone finally got a signal, and immediately it flooded with messages. His mother wondering where he was, his work asking if he was okay. 2 messages from his grandfather asking the same thing in slightly different words. Marcus called his grandfather back. "You got your truck working," his grandfather said immediately. "Yeah, it fired right up." "Good, I'm glad you're safe." They didn't talk about Eleanor. They didn't talk about the photographs or the letter or the journal. They talked about the truck, about the weather, about work, but something had changed in the space between them, a new understanding that existed in the things they didn't say. "I'll call you when I get home," Marcus said. "Good. Marcus, I'm glad the cabin was there. I'm glad you found shelter." "Me too." After he hung up, Marcus sat in the diner booth and thought about his grandfather's life, about the complexity of people and choices, and the ways that family stories are never as simple as they seem from the outside. He thought about Elena, about what it must have been like to love someone and keep that love carefully hidden for decades. He thought about his grandfather writing in his journal, processing a life that nobody else knew about. And he thought about the letter he'd left on the cabin table, knowing that his grandfather would find it eventually, would understand what it meant, would know that his secret wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a story, and stories had a way of mattering even when they were hidden. 3 weeks later, Marcus drove to Arizona to see his grandfather. He'd thought about it for 2 weeks before actually committing to the drive, trying to figure out what to say, how to approach the conversation. In the end, he decided the best approach was to just show up and let the conversation happen naturally. His grandfather lived in a small house on the edge of Flagstaff, a place he'd moved to after retiring from ranch work. It was modest but well-maintained, surrounded by a garden that showed the same careful attention his grandfather gave to everything else. He was sitting on the front porch when Marcus pulled up, as if he'd been waiting. They hugged awkwardly. They weren't physically affectionate people, and it showed. And then his grandfather made coffee, and they sat in the small living room, with the afternoon light coming through the windows. "I got your letter," his grandfather said eventually. "I found it when I went back up to the cabin. I wasn't sure if you would." "Of course I did." His grandfather looked older than Marcus remembered, more fragile. "I was wondering how long it would take before you asked questions." "I haven't asked any," Marcus said carefully. "I figured you'd tell me if you wanted to." His grandfather smiled, the first real smile Marcus had seen from him in years. "Smart. That's smarter than I was at your age." He was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup between his hands. "Elena is a good woman. She always was. We met working on a ranch in New Mexico in the 1950s. She was a cook, and I was breaking horses. It wasn't a situation where anything could happen openly. Different times, you understand, and different families with different expectations. But it happened anyway. She's the woman in the photographs. Yes, we saw each other for several years, but it was complicated. I had responsibilities to my family, to the expectations about who I was supposed to marry, to the life I was supposed to live. Elena understood that. She was patient with me, which was more generous than I deserved." "What happened?" Marcus asked. "I made a choice. I married your grandmother, which was what was expected. Elena moved to Santa Fe and built her own life. We kept in touch carefully, letters, occasional visits when we could make it work. We've never fully lost touch, but we've been careful to respect the boundaries. It's not the happiest ending, but it's an honest one." Marcus thought about that. "Does my family know? Your mother suspects something, but she's never asked directly, and I've never told her. Some things are private, even in a family." His grandfather looked at Marcus directly. "I'm telling you because you found the photographs, and you had the good sense to ask thoughtful questions instead of judgmental ones. That matters." They talked for hours. His grandfather told him stories about Elena, about the ranch, about choices made under pressure and how you live with those choices. He told Marcus about falling in love with your grandmother anyway, about making a good life, even when it's not the life you originally imagined. He told him about regret and acceptance and the ways that love doesn't always look like what you expect it to. "Why keep the photographs?" Marcus asked. "Because forgetting isn't the answer to anything," his grandfather said. "Some people are important in your life. They shape who you are. Just because you don't marry them doesn't mean they stop mattering. I wanted to remember Elena clearly, not as a vague memory, but as she actually was. So I kept the photographs and the letters." Before Marcus left, his grandfather gave him Elena's phone number. "I'm not asking you to do anything with it," he said, "but I thought you should have it. She knows about you. I've mentioned you over the years. If you ever want to talk to her, to understand more of the story from her perspective, you can. That's for you to decide." Marcus took the number, folded it carefully and put it in his wallet. He wasn't sure if he would ever use it, but he was glad to have the choice. 6 months after the blizzard, Marcus was back in the mountains, this time on purpose, in daylight, on a clear June day, when the high country was alive with wildflowers and the sound of water running from the snowmelt. The world up here was completely different from the frozen landscape that had nearly claimed him. Aspens shimmered in the breeze, their leaves catching light like coins. Columbines bloomed in clusters along the trail, their purple and white petals fragile against the rock. The sky was so blue it hurt to look at, and the air smelled like earth and growing things instead of ice and desperation. He'd called Elena 3 months after leaving his grandfather's house. It had taken him that long to work up the courage, to figure out what he wanted to say to a woman he'd never met, but who'd somehow been part of his family his entire life. He dialed the number his grandfather had given him at least a dozen times before actually letting it ring through. When Elena answered, she sounded exactly like Marcus had imagined, warm, careful, genuinely interested rather than just polite. "Your grandfather told me you found the pictures," she'd said after Marcus introduced himself. "I did. During a blizzard. I was lost, and the cabin was the only shelter I could find." There had been a pause, and then Eleanor had said something that stuck with Marcus. "He must have wanted you to find them. Santiago doesn't believe in accidents." They talked for 40 minutes that first call, and Elena had told him stories about his grandfather that Marcus had never heard, not just romantic stories, but real ones, about his grandfather's kindness, his sense of humor, his way of paying attention to details. She talked about the ranch where they'd met, about the specific way he'd looked at her, the first time she understood he was interested in her, about the moment they'd both realized that what was happening between them wasn't going to go away quietly. Marcus had asked her if she wanted to meet him, and after another long pause, Elena had said yes. They decided on the cabin, which felt appropriate somehow. The place where the story had started revealing itself was the right place to hear the full version from the person who'd lived it. Now, standing outside the cabin on a June morning with the mountains looking their best, Marcus watched Elena's car pull up the access road. She was 74 years old, and she looked like the woman in the photographs. Older, of course, but with the same clear eyes and the same genuine smile that suggested she found life interesting rather than exhausting. She moved carefully but steadily. Someone who took care of themselves and didn't expect their body to do more than it could manage. "You look like your grandfather," Elena said when they shook hands. "Around the eyes and the way you stand." And they spent the morning on the cabin porch, drinking coffee and talking. Elena had brought a folder with her, old photographs, letters, newspaper clippings from Santa Fe. She had built a life there, had become a well-known cook, had opened her own restaurant in the 1980s. Her life was full and rich and separate from Marcus's grandfather, but it had also been shaped by knowing him. "I don't think your grandfather regrets his life," Elena said at one point as they were looking through the photographs together. "He loved your grandmother. He was a good husband and a good father. He was good at the work he did, and he built something real. But he also would have loved me in different circumstances. Those two things can both be true at the same time." "Why did you keep in touch with him?" Marcus asked. "After all these years, after you both moved on, why stay connected?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the mountains. "Because some people matter in a way that doesn't make logical sense. Because I wanted to know how his life turned out. Because he wanted to know how mine turned out. Because love doesn't always disappear just because you can't be together. It changes shape, but it doesn't vanish." She told him about the last time she'd seen his grandfather 3 years ago, when they'd met for lunch in Albuquerque. They'd sat for 4 hours, mostly just talking about their lives, about aging, about the ways that time had changed them. His grandfather had told her about Marcus, about the mountains, about his work as a ranger. He'd asked about her restaurant, about her grandchildren. She had 3 from her marriage to someone else decades ago. About whether she was happy. I told him yes, I was happy, Elena said, but I also told him that I'd always wondered what it would have been like if things had been different. He said he wondered the same thing sometimes, but that the not knowing was better than the knowing in some ways. At least he could imagine all the possibilities. They walked through the forest around the cabin, and Elena pointed out places where she and Marcus's grandfather had walked together decades ago. She showed him a flat rock by a small stream where they'd sat one afternoon and talked about the future. She showed him a grove of aspen trees where they'd danced once, to music playing on a battery-powered radio, completely alone in the mountains. He was romantic, Elena said, smiling at the memory. People think of him as this gruff, practical man, and he is those things, but he was also romantic. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person who mattered, like this moment right now was the only moment that had ever existed. Marcus listened and tried to reconcile this description with the grandfather he knew. The man who called once a month and mostly talked about the weather, who seemed to exist in a state of permanent practicality. But as he listened to Elena talk, he began to understand that his grandfather contained multitudes. He was both the practical man and the romantic one. He was both the devoted husband and the person who'd loved Elena. He was complete and whole and complicated, and the blizzard had simply forced Marcus to acknowledge that complexity rather than living in ignorance of it. They drove down the mountain together in the late afternoon, Elena following in her car, and they stopped at a small town for dinner before Elena headed back to Santa Fe. They ate in a diner with red vinyl booths and a view of the mountains in the distance, and Elena told Marcus more stories about his grandfather as a young man, about the choices he'd made, about the person he'd been before Marcus knew him. He wanted you to know, Elena said as they were finishing dessert. That's why he kept those photographs where you might find them. I think he hoped one of his grandchildren would eventually understand that people are complicated, and that's not a bad thing. That understanding people means accepting that they're full of contradictions and mysteries. Did he ever tell you to give me that number? Marcus asked. Did he ask you to meet with me? No, Elena said, but I think he hoped we would meet eventually. He wanted the people he loved to know each other, even if he couldn't be the one to introduce us. Marcus drove back to his truck thinking about inheritance. Not money or property, but the inheritance of understanding, of knowing that people were larger than the roles they played in your life. His grandfather had left him that inheritance hidden in a cabin in the mountains, waiting for a blizzard to force Marcus to find it. A year after the blizzard, Marcus was working as a guide for a mountain tourism company. He'd left his ranger position and started his own small business, leading people into the high country, teaching them how to read weather and respect the mountains and understand that nature wasn't hostile. It was just indifferent to human intentions. The work was satisfying in a way that bureaucratic ranger work had never been. He got to spend his days in the mountains, got to share his knowledge with people who genuinely wanted to learn, got to exist in the high country in a way that felt like coming home. His business was called Storm Shelter, which amused his grandfather to no end. Marcus had named it deliberately, choosing the name as a kind of permanent acknowledgement of how that blizzard had changed the trajectory of his life. He'd spent the spring and early summer guiding people through wilderness areas, teaching basic survival skills, showing people how to move through the mountains with respect and intention rather than just conquest. One of his regular clients was Elena. She came up to the mountains twice a year now, in summer and early fall, to walk through the high country. She didn't go on the most difficult hikes, but she moved steadily through the moderate trails, and she always had stories to tell about the places they visited. Sometimes Marcus's grandfather came with them, not for the full hikes, but for the evening gatherings where they sat around the cabin, drinking coffee and watching the sun go down. Marcus was sitting in the cabin one evening in September, the sun just going down, painting the western sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed almost impossible. His grandfather was asleep in one of the cabin chairs. He napped more easily now, his energy more conserved, and Elena was reading a book on the porch. It was one of those moments that contained multiple layers of contentment. The beauty of the mountain evening, the presence of people he cared about, the simple fact of being in a place that mattered. He was writing in a journal of his own. It wasn't something his grandfather had taught him to do. His grandfather had never mentioned the journal, but somehow Marcus had figured it out anyway. He'd started writing about 6 months ago, after the meeting with Elena, and the journal had become a way for him to process the world, to understand the complex relationships and stories that made up his life. His grandfather had written in his journal about regret and acceptance. His great-grandfather, whose journal his grandfather had shown him during one of their recent conversations, had written about the mountains as a kind of spiritual practice, a way of understanding your place in something much larger than yourself. Marcus was writing about unexpected grace, about the ways that life breaks open and shows you things you didn't know you needed to understand, about how a single storm could reshape everything. He wrote, "The mountains gave me shelter when I needed it, but they also gave me something else, a story that wasn't mine, but that became mine anyway, a connection to people I never would have known otherwise." Abuelo spent decades keeping a part of his life private, and then suddenly, I found it, and we had to figure out how to exist together with that knowledge. It wasn't easy, but it was good, it was honest, and that matters more than easy. He wrote about Elena, about the way his grandfather looked at her with an expression that contained both tenderness and a kind of peaceful acceptance of the life they'd chosen. He wrote about his mother, who had eventually asked what was different, why their calls had shifted, and to whom Marcus had carefully explained about the photographs, about Eleanor, about the choice his grandfather had made decades ago. "I always wondered about her," his mother had said. "He was different whenever he came back from Santa Fe, lighter somehow, like he'd been carrying something and had finally put it down for a while. I think he loved her," Marcus had said. "I think so too," his mother had replied. "I'm glad he had someone. I'm glad it mattered. I'm glad you found out. I think he needed you to know." The journal had become a way for Marcus to work through the complexity of that knowledge. Writing forced him to articulate things that were difficult to put into words. The way his understanding of family had shifted, the way he'd come to see his grandfather as a complete person rather than just a role. The way that learning about Elena had somehow made him feel closer to his grandfather rather than confused or betrayed. He wrote about the specific moment when his grandfather had told him that he was proud of the business Marcus had started, that he understood why Marcus had named it Storm Shelter. His grandfather had said, "I spent my whole life running from storms, trying to outrun them, trying to survive them. You're doing something different. You're teaching people to find shelter, to respect the storm, to understand it. That's better than what I learned to do." Over the past year, Marcus had also been getting to know Elena in her own right, separate from his grandfather. She had become something like a friend, someone he could talk to about the mountains, about his life, about the ways that people navigated between duty and desire. She'd told him about her own children, about her marriage to a man named Thomas who died 15 years ago, about the restaurant business and how she'd built something meaningful from the talent she'd always possessed. "Your grandfather never tried to change me," Elena had said one afternoon as they were hiking. "He just supported me in being myself." I think that's what love is sometimes. Not the dramatic romantic moments, though. Those matter too. Just being someone who sees you clearly and doesn't try to make you smaller. Marcus had asked her if she had any regrets about the way things had turned out with his grandfather. "Every day," she'd said immediately, "and also never. Both things are true simultaneously. I regret that we couldn't be together. I regret that I had to build a separate life. But I don't regret the life I built, and I don't regret that your grandfather had the life he had, because I can see that it was a good life. He raised a good son, who raised good children, and one of those children raised you. So the path he chose, even though it hurt both of us, created something real and lasting. The storm had changed things, not in a dramatic way, but fundamentally. Marcus understood his family differently now. He understood that people were full of hidden depths, that the stories you didn't know about were sometimes more important than the ones you did, that the mountains kept secrets and revealed them according to their own timeline. He understood that his grandfather had given him an enormous gift by letting those photographs be found, by allowing Marcus to see him as a complete human being. His grandfather stirred in his chair, waking up. "Are you writing in that journal again?" he asked, a small smile on his face. "Yeah. Writing about the mountains. Good. Someone should write about them. They deserve to be remembered accurately, not the way people usually remember them, as obstacles or conquests. They're just themselves. That's enough." Elena came inside as the light was failing completely, bringing the smell of the evening with her, cool air and pine and the particular scent of high altitude. They made dinner together in the cabin's small kitchen, the three of them moving around each other in the practiced way of people who'd done this many times before. If you enjoyed this story, leave a comment below. I really want to know what you think, and I love reading what you all have to say. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and subscribe now and turn on the notifications so you don't miss any of our future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. As they were eating, Marcus looked around the table, at his grandfather, at Elena, at the cabin that had become a gathering place for people who understood that the most important stories were the ones that took time to unfold, that required patience and attention and willingness to be surprised by what you found. The blizzard had brought him here initially, but it was the choices that mattered. His grandfather's choice to keep the photographs, Elena's choice to keep in touch across decades, Marcus's choice to ask questions instead of judge, to listen instead of dismiss, to build a relationship based on understanding rather than assumption. The mountains held all of these choices in their vastness, indifferent but present, ancient and patient. They'd sheltered him, revealed secrets and connected him to people he never would have known otherwise. And that, Marcus understood now, was what the storm had left behind. Not trauma or fear, but connection, understanding, and the knowledge that sometimes the things that break open your life are the things that make it whole.